Good morning. Welcome. I love you guys. Welcome to the Candor Workshop Series. My name is Kate Carpenter, and I'm the program manager for the Compass Inn at IHC. And I want to welcome you all here this morning. We are pretty pumped up about Workshop 4. But before we get started, we've got a couple of housekeeping items that we've got to go through. And by couple, I mean a couple pages. So bear with me. Let's see, cell phones. Check your cell phone, pull it out, make sure you've got it on silent for the day. Restrooms. Restrooms are located out this door, down the hall. Wrap yourself around where you see reception, and the restrooms are on your left-hand side, about halfway down this hall behind us. The IHC conference space is a secure space, so you got a name badge when you checked in today. Please do keep that with you at all times. That'll get you entrance back into this space if you choose to step out at some point throughout the day. There's been 6.5 nursing contact hours available and granted for today's workshop. You should have received a CEU form when you arrived today. Looks like this. If you did not, will you please raise a hand and our team will bring one of those to you. You have to attend the full workshop today to get credit, and we'll need you to fill this out and drop it back off with the registration desk before you leave today. The workshop's also been approved for CME credits, and to receive the credit, you need to have signed in at the registration desk, completed the attestation form, and turned it in prior to leaving today's workshop. DMU, Des Moines University, will send that credit directly to those recipients if you filled out both forms. Relevant to the content of this educational activity, all speakers and our planning committee have no conflicts of interest to disclose. You're going to be receiving an email link when you leave today to complete an online evaluation for today's workshop. We would really be appreciative if you take just a couple moments to complete that when you return back to your office. At the end of that evaluation, you're going to be able to print a certificate of attendance that you can use for self-reporting purposes. We encourage you to keep that form along with the brochure for your file. There is a $50 flex travel stipend available per critical access hospital to help you assist you with travel expenses attending today's workshop. To get that stipend, you need to have had somebody from your facility sign in at the registration desk, and those will be mailed to facilities. Lastly, on the announcements, breakfast and lunch have been generously sponsored by ServiceShare. Please join me in thanking them for their generosity. Okay, so I think that is all the boring stuff, and so now we get to jump in today. And so our project team is, I think, just genuinely really excited as we take the momentum from the last 3 workshops and start into today. We've got to hear from several of you over the past couple of months about how you've already implemented this work. Some of you have taken it to your staff meetings, some of you have taken it to your provider communities, some of you have taken it and presented to your board of directors. Some of you have pulled in your legal representation and your insurers. Some of you have met with your networks. Some of you have met more regionally. And we're just so grateful, I think. Grateful is the right word for your willingness to be so participatory, so engaged in this series and really lean into this content. And I think there's a general sense of, and Tim can catch me if I'm wrong, we're excited to see what you do after you leave this series because we have so much momentum and we want you to know that you have so much support as this series concludes. But we are pretty pumped up about today. We've got a full day scheduled for you, so we want to jump into that. In planning this series, I've gotten to know Tim quite well and admire his dedication to this work. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. McDonald. He is the president for the Center of Open and Honest Communication at the MedStar Institute for Quality and Safety. He is a professor of law at Loyola University in Chicago, and he is a physician attorney whose research has focused on the principled approach to patient harm, with an emphasis on reporting patient safety events with the use of simulation and human factors analysis and providing open and honest communication following a harm event. His federally funded research has focused on these domains and their impact on improving the quality of care while mitigating medical liability and other related legal issues. Please help me welcome back to Iowa Dr. McDonald and his team.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It is so good to see all these familiar faces. It's just fantastic. So as you can see on our list up there, Bruce is back, as you may remember him from Workshop 1. Super great to be working with him. Marty's back with us today. I'll be introducing Carol in a little bit. And then we have 3 actors today. 2 of them are going to play the role of family members who you're going to have an initial conversation with, and then the final conversation with after you do the candor consent. And then one of the actors is going to play a neurosurgeon who was involved in the event we're going to jump into here in a little bit, where you're going to be able to have the opportunity to do a cognitive interview to learn what happened, and then also provide peer support. So we have 4 enactments that will build out throughout the day as we take this event from the beginning all the way to the end with resolution and debrief with all of you and kind of talk through that piece. What's being handed out now, and I'll give you just a minute or 2 to fill that out, is it's kind of an assessment form that wants you to measure yourself right now in both how you perceive your level of knowledge around these domains, and then also one around your confidence in communicating with patients and families and providing peer support. So we want you to fill out the white part now, not the gray part. The gray part I'm going to have you do at the very end to see if there's a difference in terms of how you perceive your knowledge and how you perceive your confidence, you know, when we're finished with that. The other part at the end of it that'd be really nice to know with these is which workshops did you attend? Because that'll be a really nice thing to kind of take a look at as well from that perspective. So I want to start, per usual, I'm going to start with this table here, just one of you. What are you hoping to get out of today? What's 1 or 2 things you'd really like to get out of the day? Because Bruce and I and Marty and Carol and the team want to make sure you get it. Michelle, what are you really hoping for today? For today?
From point A to point Z.
Okay.
Those conversations, and I feel like I need more help yet on that final resolution around the financial implications.
Okay. Excellent. Great. Thank you. How about somebody from this table? Something specifically that you want to make sure we hit today related to this. I know you guys were at Workshop 1, right? So any part about this you want to make sure we hit in general?
I'd say care for the caregiver.
Care for the caregiver. Great. Great. We will talk about that. And then Bruce is going to come back and speak specifically again about providing that kind of empathic support. How about you guys? Anything real specific you're hoping to make sure we hit on today?
I think the flow, as
Okay.
we just mentioned, but also the conversation about the candor and the legal aspect of signing that paper.
Yes.
Just a little bit more nuance around how to do that.
Excellent. Great. And we have our colleagues here who will be able to speak to that because we are going to enact that again, like we did the last workshop, you know, getting the consent, what it means, and we'll have them weigh in and doing that. Great. How about you guys? Anything specific you're hoping to get out of today, or?
It's been said, care for the caretaker.
Okay. Excellent. Really good. How about you guys?
I think first that I don't quite understand how we have that conversation about what we are financially going to take care of or what we're not going to take care of. So the financial aspect,
Good.
Where does that enter into the conversation?
Great. So we have a whole section on that we want to hit today after lunch to really get into that. How about from this table over here? Anybody willing? Jerry will. I love Jerry.
Hi.
Jerry and I have a long history. I'm so glad you're here. An unbelievable history that we will share later on.
I'm going to let my other colleagues who have been here talk about their expectations for today, because I have huge expectations from everybody in the room.
Yeah. Jerry, actually, while you're here, briefly tell the story of how you and I are connected. Because I don't think Bruce, where's Bruce? Do you know Jerry? Have you met her before? Great. So if you can briefly share this, because the group did hear the story. The group did hear the story on the first workshop.
Yeah.
So if you could share a little bit about how you and I know each other, yeah.
So my name is Jerry Lewis Jenkins, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at Copic, which is a medical professional liability company in Denver, Colorado. We also are here in Iowa and Nebraska. So I was sitting in a conference. It was actually the Colorado Medical Society meeting. I apologize for my back. And Dr. McDonald happened to be on a panel with our then CEO, Dr. Buckley, talking about early resolution programs. And Dr. McDonald started out his presentation, as he does most of the time, with a profile of how this program started, with an event that occurred with a woman by the name of Karen Coughlin. He used the initials but went through all of the events. I was sitting sort of toward the back of the room, and my heart stopped because that was my best friend. And I had eulogized Karen at her funeral and knew her friends and her brothers and her sisters and her soon-to-be husband, and knew how devastating this event was. Unfortunately, I didn't handle myself very well that day, because after the composing myself and realizing sort of what was happening, I went up to Tim and in not so professional language told him that they had really screwed up, that they had really devastated this family because they went under. Nobody knew the truth. There was no disclosure. It was like a woman that everybody loved dearly went into the hospital, had an adverse outcome, to say the least, missed lab result, and it was devastating. It was devastating to everybody, and it continues to be devastating to me to this day. But the good news part of this story is Karen started out as a nurse. She was a neonatal ICU nurse at Loma Linda. Her passion was always around healthcare and patients and doing the right thing for patients. So I come to these things with a full heart, and I really ask all of you to embrace this for the good of patients and families. This is the right thing to do. And so in Karen's memory, I thank you all for being here. I thank you all for doing what you're doing, and you are making a difference.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. I appreciate that. Yeah, so many of you may remember when we started off Workshop 1, I told you about how we did it wrong. You can imagine when somebody from the audience stands up and says, well, that was my best friend. My heart stopped too, Jerry, when you did that. But at least we learned from it, and we really tried to change it a lot, even though we've never had that opportunity yet to maybe someday to meet with the family and explain to them what we've been able to do. So I think, thank you again for sharing that. How about this table here? Anything specific you'd like to get out of today that I want to make sure we hit?
Just looking at the agenda, the process improvement.
Oh, good. We really went heavy on that. As you can see, we've added a handout to this that has lots and lots of that kind of information we're going to work through today, so thank you. The whole goal, again, of the Candor piece, we believe, is the learning and improving, and you can't do it unless you're transparent, and that's kind of what it is. How about you guys? Anything else specific you want to make sure we hit?
Well, today I invited our CNO from our network so that we can further take steps forward to making this happen for us in Mercy Health Network.
Great. Thank you very much.
Pulling it all together.
Thank you for being here. This is really great. So at any rate, going back to the Candor Flow, we're going to hit all this today with the case that we talked about that we'll jump into. You hear about the event. How do you activate? How do you first process map the whole thing? How are you going to do that? And then so when you have an event, how do you process it? How do you activate it? How do you make sure there's effective communication early and often and ongoing with the patient and family? And the caregivers, the care for the caregiver, as you all mentioned. And then as you just mentioned, how do you learn from this? And as you learn more, share more. As you learn more, share more. And then ultimately come to a decision about how are you now going to approach the family with some of the things we talked about, which is the obligation to ensure we're making them as whole as possible on the financial side, realizing, as I've learned from Carol and so many other people, when these bad things happen, there's often no ultimate resolution for the family because it's really impactful and goes on. But we have an obligation to make sure we do what we do to try to make them whole, both financially and non-financially in the resolution part, and that's what we'll talk about today. So we're putting it all together. You're going to see the event. We're going to take it from the beginning all the way through to the end. This is a real case that happened again at the University of Illinois that we're going to be able to share with you a lot of the nuts and bolts in doing that piece of it. And this is the paradigm shift that we've talked about at all the workshops. And in every one of these are going to apply today. So when you see this event, think in your organization, how would you want it to be reported right away so that people could respond? The communication piece, again, with the family right away, ongoing, providing a really human factors process redesign event review. We're really going to talk about that today. We left out of your little handout there that gets into this fire in the OR case. And there are so many things we hope you'll learn in the process of the event review. The care for the caregiver, you're going to have an opportunity to provide peer support to the surgeon who was involved in a horrible fire in the operating room when they played a big role with that. And then ultimately the resolution part. How do we think about, particularly in a case like this that has so many ongoing expenses and procedures related to it, how do we manage that? So again, the case for Candor. What I'm going to do now is play a very short video that is an edit from the video that is at the Candor Toolkit website. And you're going to see it in a minute. You'll be able to write it down, which is ahrq.gov/Candor. You're going to hear from a family member. You're going to hear from a physician who was involved in an event, and you're going to hear from the past head of AHRQ in this pretty short video. And then after that, I'll introduce Carol to speak to you for a bit.
I have a beautiful blonde hair, blue-eyed 9-year-old daughter who is a quirky little girl, contagious laugh, funny, avid reader, and she was a blooming artist and an athlete, and she's no longer with me anymore. She died of medical errors. She got a hospital-acquired infection. She was a classic case of failure to rescue, where all the signs were there and that she was deteriorating and no one did anything.
At any one time, 1 in 25 hospitalized patients has a healthcare-associated infection, or HAI. About 75,000 hospital patients with HAIs died during their hospitalization. In the case of Carol's daughter, Alyssa, the hospital's response was less than optimal.
She was in a teaching institution where the fear of hierarchy was there and the resident didn't go up the chain of command. The organization where she died shut down on me. They wouldn't talk about what happened. They would not give me her medical records. It took the organization where she died 3 years, 7 months, and 28 days to have a conversation with me.
The current system doesn't work well for patients or providers or hospitals. When harm occurs, the strong tendency for hospitals is to disclose as little as possible about what's happened.
For Dr. Heather Farley, being forced into silence in another case made her question her ability as a healthcare provider and nearly ended her career as an emergency room physician.
I remember the day really clearly, even though it's several years ago now. I remember what she looked like. I remember the sound of her voice. She came in saying that she was having some palpitations. And it's a very frequent complaint that we see in the emergency department. Did a full physical exam, and we put her on the monitor, and we did a whole bunch of blood work on her, an EKG, x-ray, pretty thorough workup. And by the time that I saw her, she wasn't having any symptoms at the time. I discharged her, and I didn't think anything more about it until the next day.
The patient went into cardiac arrest on the drive home from the hospital. She was resuscitated and admitted to the intensive care unit.
I was sitting in my office checking my email, and my administrative assistant called across the hall and said, "Hey, did you know that patient that you saw yesterday? She ended up coming back in." And my heart sank.
Dr. Farley's first instinct was to visit the patient in the ICU and talk with her family.
And everybody that I talked to said, I don't think it's a good idea if you talk to the family. And I just wanted to tell them what I knew, and because I knew that they were suffering and I knew they had questions, and I just wanted to reach out to them, but I never got the opportunity to talk to them, which is something that I regret to this day.
The patient later died in the hospital.
Several months later, I was notified that I was being sued, which is the first time that had happened in my career. I know that I'm a good person, and I care about my patients, and I work hard. And to have someone there accusing you of not caring, of being a bad physician, of being incompetent, it just strikes so deeply. Most emergency physicians, there's a high percentage that are sued at some point in their career. I knew it was probably inevitable, but it doesn't make it any easier.
So if you go to the website, you'll see that video. It's right up there first, and there's a lot more to it that explains really what Candor is and how it fits, with when you see it, how it connects, to your legislation. So I think it's really powerful in terms of doing that. But wanted to show that part because it shows the family, piece of it. But in addition to that, as some of you mentioned as well, the caregiver part. So with that, what I'd like to do is to invite Carol Hemmelgarn to come up and join me. She was the mom in the first part of the video. Carol is involved in healthcare. I don't know if you'll share much of that at all, but as we would say, she's sometimes we consider the dark side as it relates to healthcare, working with big pharma. But she's a mom, and she's a wife, and she's an amazing patient advocate. And I met her 10 years ago in Colorado, Jerry, and have been in many, many places. In fact, one of the most fun places we ever went to was about 8,000 miles away, when Carol brought her story and her perspective to the Middle East in Doha, Qatar. As many of you know, I help open a hospital there. And it was very profound. If I could just share one little story, Carol, are you okay with me doing that? So we did a 4-day workshop with medical students, nursing students, and resident physicians in the Middle East. And after Carol told her story, we interviewed the impact of having the patient or the family in the room. And this one woman, and we actually have it on tape, said it was the first time in her life she ever felt empathy for someone who had gotten care in the healthcare system. It was the first time in her life. And she's probably 25, 30 years old. It was so impactful. So it was really great to go over there. Maybe we'll go back. We'll see if we can work that out. But Carol, I'm going to kind of let you take it from here. Here's your slide advance. And thank you for being here.
Silence. It's like white space on a sheet of paper. It's void of any actions or words. And yet sometimes it's this silence that screams loudest in our ears when there's no transparency, there's no communication after medical harm. You see, the first time you harm us, it's an accident. But you harm us again when silence is what we hear. And to me, that's the second tragedy. How many of you were here for at least one of the 3 previous sessions? Okay, so many of you heard the story of a sister, a father, a patient, and their experience in the healthcare system. While the outcome was horrific for Chrissy's sister, Michelle, and for Jack Gentry, who's now quadriplegic, it was the process, the Candor process, that was done well. It was ethical, it was moral, it was respectful. and it was humane. So why is it that some organizations can excel with these conversations and others fail miserably? I think it's two key things. One, it's leadership in the organization when it comes to implementing these kind of programs. And two, it's the process. But I think it's really you all in this room. You have to have leadership on board, but it's you all that are going to do the work, that are the implementers, that are the champions. And you're going to take it, and some of you that have mentioned earlier, you're going to take the process from the minute an error occurs and you hear about it to the end when the patients and families no longer have any questions. That's truly when the process ends. I think the time is ripe right now to turn the tables. And what I mean by that is the norm becomes having these courageous conversations, and the outliers are the ones still in the deny and defend mode. I wish I weren't standing here today. Because my story is the antithesis of what happened with Michelle and Chrissy's and parents, Bob and Barb Malizo, and what happened with Jack Gentry and his wife Teresa. Their families were treated correctly. The organization showed benevolence by taking care of them mentally, physically, psychologically, and financially. That's the right way to care for patients and families after harm. I can describe my experience with one word: inhumane. I'd like to introduce you to my 9-year-old daughter, Alyssa. Alyssa was diagnosed with leukemia, ALL, on a Monday afternoon. She died 10 days later. In this day and age, and even at that time, you do not die of leukemia in 10 days. She died of multiple medical errors, some of which you saw on the video. I'm not going to get into the whole medical aspect of what went wrong, because I can tell you that many things, and it's riddled with all kinds of problems. What I can tell you is that she died a painful and excruciating death. And as a mother, I will never forgive myself for that. So what is it that we want to know after medical harm? Well, you look at the literature and they say there's 4 key things. I actually think there's a 5th. The first thing we want to know is, tell us what happened. And when we say tell us what happened, we mean what we want to know, not what you think you should tell us or what you feel comfortable telling us, but what we want to know, our questions. For some people, it may be 3 short things and that's it. For others, they may say, take me from point A the minute we walked in to the end. But if you ask, they'll tell you what they want. The second thing is, take responsibility. You see, we live with the guilt. We carry the immense burden when we don't know what has happened to our loved ones. And we live in this world of what ifs. I often say, what if I'd have gone to a different hospital? What if I'd have asked for a different resident? What if when no one listened to me, I picked up the phone and I called 911 to get outside help to come in? The third thing is the 2 little words, I'm sorry. They're 2 small words, but they carry immense power, and they are so important for us to hear. The 4th is, tell us, how are you going to fix the system? You see, we need to know that what happened to our loved ones doesn't happen again, because if it does, then their life was in vain. And I think the 5th that we're starting to see more and more is, let us be involved in helping you solve the problems. Be part of the solution if it's something we want to do. 3 years, 7 months, and 28 days. You heard that in the video. It is how long it took for the organization to have the most honest and open conversation with me. Some of you may be like, well, how would you know all those days, Carol? I know them because every morning until that point in time, I got up and I walked into my daughter's room and I started my day by telling her I was sorry. I was sorry that I wasn't a better parent in keeping her alive. So did the organization answer the questions I needed? Well, when I finally had the conversation with them, did they tell me what happened? Well, they told me what happened up until a point in time, and they told me after the point in time. So did I get all my answers? No. Did they take responsibility? Well, they did for the care up until that point in time and after that point in time. Did they say, I'm sorry? I finally did hear the 2 words, I'm sorry, but it was a little late. And I actually told them in the meeting that they needed to tell Alyssa they were sorry because she was the one no longer here. Did they fix the problems? That's probably what they did best. They put in algorithms. They created rapid response teams. They did that well, and I was actually able to start to engage with them on some of that work. And I am always very honest about this organization. It took us a while to build trust again, but I do a lot of work for them now. I sit on their highest board in the organization, just under the board of directors now. We've publicly gone out and talked about what has happened, and they admit the horrible things. But you see, I still don't know a 12-hour period of my daughter's life because there was a resident and a nurse working with me at that time, and they've never been willing to talk to me. And I think they carry a lot of guilt. But what makes me sad is I think if there was a care for the caregiver type program and they would have been taken care of, they'd have been able to talk to me. And I think that is such an important part of this program because if we're gonna have conversations, we have to take care of our caregivers. In many ways, because I don't have answers still, I still grieve. There are some days that I wish someone could wear my shoes and feel what I feel. Because even though grief weighs nothing, I carry it around with me all the time. And grief has become my twin. I inhabit grief, and grief inhabits me. And there's some times that my 2 closest friends are loneliness and isolation. I share this with you because I'm just trying to give you a glimpse. If we don't know what has happened to our loved ones in their care, it becomes this chasm in our life, and it runs deep and it runs wide. And it impacts so many. It impacts our children, our marriage, our family, our work. And it never goes away. If you will indulge me, I want to give you a brief glimpse of what that looks like. Alyssa has a younger brother. His name is Griffin. He's a senior in high school. And if any of you have had seniors in high school and they're getting ready for college, they have to write a personal essay. I have been bugging him for the last, month or 2, asking to read his personal essay. I want to read it. I know it's done because he's told me. But he says, Mom, I don't know that I can ever let you read the whole thing, and it breaks my heart. What he did is he gave me 3 snippets of a paragraph. And I don't even know if this is the whole thing, but I want to read it to you so you understand the impact. The small bird stumbled from the median shrubbery onto the road's asphalt. I stopped the car and approached the bird cautiously. The duckling, smaller than the size of my fist, lay motionless except for his head rhythmically bobbing up and down like a child struggling to stay awake. She seemed so feeble. I had no doubt the duckling wouldn't live. Peering down at the duckling, I saw myself. I saw myself walking through the front door of my house, my parents sitting on the couch side by side. I saw their wet hair and red eyes, evidence of the tears they had been shedding. I saw their hands shake as they told me about the accident. My sister wouldn't be coming home from the hospital. I felt as helpless as the duck. I took the duck home and nurtured it, wondering with uncertainty whether she would survive. I, too, had lived with similar uncertainty. The few years following the death of my sister, I lived a fragile life. I balanced on a tightrope, and the smallest gust could send me plummeting. The weight of grief stopped me from living a normal life. I was no longer like other kids. They couldn't understand the cage in which I was trapped. I only wished my cage was a wooden box. My cage was living in a quiet household where being sad was all I knew. It was as if I signed away my childhood, forfeited my rights to laughter, joy, and happiness. My parents and I never talked about her death. There was always a gray area that greatly affected me. I struggled alone to overcome the guilt of continuing on with my life without my sister. I stumbled and fell often, from which calluses emerged. I grew accustomed to the heartbreak of saying no when asked, "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" Or the sound of only one set of legs walking home from school. I dealt with being my parents' first child to go to high school when I should have been the second. You all are here today to do something that I think is extremely noble work, and that is to embed and create these programs, these communication and resolution programs, Candor programs. But you have to understand that you use the word resolution, but there's never any resolution for us. It's never resolved. What our lives become is we learn to adapt to a new norm. Many people ask me, why do I do this? Because every time I have a conversation like this, I lose a piece of myself. And I don't get it back. And I never had a good answer until literally the other day when I was out running. And I was thinking about talking to you all, and it hit me. You see, every time I lose a piece, I give it back to Alyssa. I am making her whole again so that her memory and legacy live on in programs like this. I'm going to leave you with this last saying and a little blurb I'm going to put up on the screen. We do not exist. Children do not exist to honor their parents. We exist to honor them. And this is how I honor my daughter now. I want you all to go out there and put these programs in so that you don't have to hear stories like mine. But more importantly, you don't have to hear essays written by children like my son. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. As Dave Mayer would say as well, I don't know how you do it, but the fact that you do inspires all of us. And I think it grounds us in the why this work is so important. So thank you for sharing that. And what I'm hoping is, as you see the day go on, you'll see a lot of the really amazing things a lot of these organizations are doing, and give us some reflection and feedback as we move forward. So again, the goal is today is to go through all of these different pieces, identifying the event, and how you and your organization will then activate your Candor process. Again, with this concept of the GO team that we've talked about before, where as quickly as possible, you are hitting the big three, particularly number one, which is communication with patients and loved ones to happen as quickly as possible. I mean, you heard Carol's story about how long she waited, and you've heard us say that what we've learned from Carol and the Melizzo family and the Gentrys and the others is, remember, every hour that goes by without effective communication following a significant harm event is another harm. And so there's this notion of how you activate it, how you move in, how you do that, and then begin, as we will go through, a true human factors event review to really understand what happened, and then providing peer support as you move forward, and then finally the resolution part. And I totally agree with Carol. For the families, a lot of this is never resolved, but there is this accountability piece that kind of fits into the resolution part. So here is the mega case. And again, you've got a document that is on your table that you will see, and I will go through the slide, which is really the top of that first document. Again, a real case. This is an elderly gentleman with dementia and severe aortic stenosis, falls at home. As many of you may know, who have ever taken care of somebody with severe aortic stenosis, syncope is a very common thing that happens when that valve gets really tight. He falls, he hits his head, he develops a subdural hematoma that needs to be evacuated. And he's taken to the operating room to put a burr hole in to relieve the pressure that is there and allow the blood to get through that. So he's prepped and draped. He's given moderate sedation, even though most of these cases would be done under general anesthesia, because the feeling is he is too ill, his heart is too fragile to withstand general anesthesia. So it's done under moderate sedation. So he's given midazolam and fentanyl. And incision is made. And 10 minutes into the procedure, the patient sits basically bolt upright. Smoke then appears from underneath the drapes, and flames are seen and are extinguished. They've not been able to do the burr hole at this point. What happens now? So the first question in this issue here, you can think about this. This is going to be really, really important when we do the human factors event review, are the three key pieces of the fire triangle. The oxygen piece, the fuel, and the heat. What were they? Where'd they come from? That's all of what we're going to want to investigate and find out during the review of this particular case. But now you're into this point many of you asked about, how do you activate your system? And pardon the pun, this happened at the University of Illinois the way they activated our system was to call the hotline. So pardon the pun as it relates to a fire in the operating room. But no, that really is what happened. And fortunately, I actually happened to be working in the OR that day. So I get a call, so the hotline goes off, our safety risk manager then calls me on my phone, and then I just go around the area where I was. We had about 25 operating rooms. I went around the area, and then boom, you could see all the smoke coming out of the operating room. A little scary to see that. But the question now is, and I'll just open it up to you, in your organization right now, do you have a process where things would get activated right away as it relates to this kind of situation? And Marty, you've got the chat box. So can any of you share a little bit about things you might have in place or are putting in place that would really get to the heart of, wow, this is one where you're really going to need the go team? Over here, Marty.
Yes. I'll toss it to you, but
Yeah. We do have plain code language, what used to be codes, and we would call a medical emergency.
Okay.
I would hope. I'm sitting here, to be honest, in the OR, a lot of times when there are difficulties that they encounter, they do not activate it. So I'm feeling very vulnerable right now. Yeah, I don't think it would go well.
Yeah. Our ORs were that way too. It was like a sign of weakness to call out to the house to ask for help in the OR, because you're supposed to have the smartest and the best of the best and all that.
Exactly.
To be there to do that. And the issue is related to that. What about all the other things that we need to be thinking about here, right? Related to the Candor that we'll get into. Any others have anything in place where you could, again, hit a button and activate it and get that sort of stuff? Here we got Marty.
So we do pretty much the same thing as Rhonda with the plain language codes, and then we page the administrator on call. So, and then that activates it for our system.
Okay. And then once it goes to the administrator on call, do you have any cascade of things that should happen in that case? Because part of this is your process flow, right? You're going to want to think about, how do you process flow? This happens, and then how do we make sure all the right people know and the components you build are going to get pulled into it?
We do. Once the administrator on call is called for anything that's a patient care related item, then I get called or paged out. And I work as the assistant administrator and chief nursing officer. I'm also the internal risk manager for our organization. And then from there, I call my team.
Okay.
And a lot of times my team exceeds our own organization and crosses into our network. So these are my to-go people.
Great. I love throwing this thing.
So I'm sitting here thinking, in my head, it feels like there's kind of two levels of response. The immediate is the fire and dealing with all of that. And that takes like one set of activation in my mind. But then there's the whole piece around the harm now and dealing with all of the Candor piece, okay? So it's kind of like a two-stage kind of response. But I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I have 4 people from my organization sitting here at this table. If this happened today with all of us sitting here, what would they be doing right now? And I'm getting a little scared when I think about that.
Oh, yeah. So to make this super reliable, you need a 24/7 process. And you need depth. You need a bench to be able to do that. I'm glad you mentioned that, because we do say when these events happen, the primary goal immediately is to take care of the patient. I mean, right away, taking care of the patient. And then pretty quickly after that, you're going to need to do some really important things related to the big 3. The care for the caregiver, clearly the family. This is going to be a real important issue here. But then the event review. Do any of you have any kind of checklist that would guide you in sort of doing this? Either piece. You guys have one?
I do, but I'm in the process of actually redesigning it after taking this class, because I realize I'm missing some key components to it. So. Okay.
And you guys?
Yeah, we work together.
Oh, you're in the same spot. So any others use any kind of checklist as it relates to, I would even put this in the crisis management piece, because a fire in the OR is such a big deal that I do think about it. Anybody else have a sort of a crisis management checklist? And the reason I ask is, at the Candor Toolkit, there is a checklist. And there is here's what you need to do in the first hour, here's what you need to do after that, and here's what you need to do after that related to it. It is really comprehensive. I find it to be a super useful piece when you want to think about process mapping. What kind of things do you think would be on that checklist in a case like this, that would be valuable in a case like this?
Secure the scene.
Secure the scene. Why is securing the scene so important here?
Because it was a fire.
Well, and what are you going to be looking for?
Yeah, we're actually going to be looking for the 3 things on the triangle.
That's
what
right.
was the source of oxygen? What was the source of combustion?
Right.
And what was the source of heat?
And so where might you look for some of those sources, particularly the fuel piece?
Garbage.
Right. So that you literally want to treat this almost like a crime scene. Yep. Because you don't want, and that's why you need to have that reliable 24/7 process. Because this had happened at 2 in the morning. You know, you need to have that reliable process where the call is going, and if it's your administrator on call, they pull up their checklist on an app. They go, oh, you know, this is a reminder, you know, don't clean the room, don't turn the monitors off, because the monitors may show how much oxygen's been giving, all that sort of stuff. There's really, really an important piece there. What else might be on that checklist? So who else to call? In this case, who are some of those people? What do you need to begin to think about preparing for?
You'd need the facilities person there.
Yep.
You need to call local fire department, you know, all of that.
Right. So you need the fire department, you need the other local facilities people. What other kind of people are you going to want to get together pretty quickly?
You'll need your risk manager, someone to talk to the family.
There, so bingo. So you already begin thinking about, you need to get your huddle together. You need to think about, who do we need to get on this call right away to start talking to? Because imagine how freaked out the people in the OR are. You know, even from a care for the caregiver part, I have seen smaller fires in the OR. Saw one when a trach was being performed, because I did a lot of anesthesia for ENT. They cut through there, they used the Bovie, a lot of oxygen was coming out, and poof, it was like a blowtorch. That's really scary when you're leaning over the OR table and that happens. So you need to think about, oh my gosh, what about my care for the caregiver piece? What is this piece? So when you start mapping your process, it will really help you to go through this checklist as you begin to think about, how are we going to do that at this organization, or how do we do it at that organization? And more importantly, I know Kate is gone, but what we talked about is, you may want to create a regional go team. In other words, a regional support service that your administrator can call and say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here as our safety net. We just had a fire in the OR. Can you help us with this a little bit? Because this is that kind of case. Who else may, yeah, over here. Yeah.
I just had a question.
Sure.
When we run a code, we always have somebody who documents everything. Usually it's an LPN or a nurse that's on the side and documenting all the medications we give, everything we do, so that's at the end of everything, when everything is said and done, we have nice documentation of what took place. I can put that in the medical records, and it's good. Is that something that's envisioned for any situation like this, when you've got somebody designated to start documenting?
Yep, and it's in the checklist.
Okay.
So that's what you want.
So
it's literally not, it's done. Okay. Who did it? What time was it done? All that stuff you want to be able to create.
Okay.
There are people also who I have seen in your reporting system have been able to design all this stuff in the checklist. So that, because when it comes to communicating to the family, when was the first conversation, when was the second, when was the third, and it'll even prompt you to say, hey, you haven't talked to the family in 24 hours here. It drives it. It force functions you to move this stuff. And that way, and then you create it on some sort of shared drive so that the team, the CNO, the CEO can go in and look and see, is all this stuff done? Because stuff will fall through the cracks, because this is chaos. The other group I would suggest that you want to put on this crisis management is media relations. Because a fire in the OR is a big deal. And some of these other cases are big deals. So you want to think about, who's our media relations person? I did a presentation, and Carol, actually this was in This was with John Walpole in Denver, and I did it with a guy who was working with a bunch of hospitals. This is his expertise, even outside of healthcare, which is it's kind of media relations, crisis management. You need a plan of what you're going to communicate to the public if this stuff happens, because you don't want it to be speak to the hand, no comment, because the public will lose trust right away. So you need to be able to think about where is our crisis management book, because most organizations have that. You know, they have some, wow, if we have a big crisis, how do we access it? This could be one of those cases. So all this is in there, and you want to think ahead of time, who is the group or what's the entity, who's going to be accountable for each of these pieces of it, and that's what we'll get into today about the communication with the family, the event review, and then, you know, the care for the caregivers. So this stuff is really important. And ongoing, what I promised Kate we would do is help work with you with some of these checklists and how various organizations have done it so you don't have to reinvent the wheel doing that from that standpoint. So now you need to think about, you have to have a conversation within 10 minutes with the family, right? You can't wait to do this. You're taking care of the fire is out. You've called a plastic surgeon into the operating room to look and see, and they've assessed this patient, and they have determined that there are some fairly significant burns on the neck and on the top of the back. And this patient is going to need that kind of stabilized for a while they think about, at some point, we got to come back and deal with this burr hole. But they haven't been able to deal with that yet. They can tell that the likely, and this is again in your kind of handout there, that the components of the fire triangle include what is kind of seen in the OR right away before you speak to the family, a charred nasal cannula that was on the patient who'd been given supplemental oxygen during the moderate sedation. There is a cautery device that has been put off to the side at the time they were putting the fire out. And you can see that DuraPrep was used to prep the skin, which is an alcohol-based prep solution. So you know, you don't know how they all got there together, and you don't know what the communication was. You don't need any. You're going to have an opportunity to do cognitive interviewing around that. But you kind of know, we own this fire, and these are kind of the components of it. But I'm going to come back to what Carol said, because I think what she said fits into our test question 3 buckets. As we've done in the previous 3 workshops, what do people want when something else or someone else harms them? What are the big 3? Give me one. They want truthful, accurate information about what happened. And they don't want it up to point B and leave out a bunch. They want truthful, accurate information. What else do they want? I'm sorry. They need an emotional, they need empathy, they need those words. They need to hear something that shows the organization is it. What else do they want? They want accountability, as Carol mentioned. What are you going to do about it? All the follow-up and all that piece of it. And so, again, this is the test question. If you take anything out, again, of these workshops, these are the things we talk about. They want truthful and accurate information. They want an empathic response. They don't want to be abandoned. They want follow-up. And that is where you get into what Carol mentioned, which is more and more, and we'll talk about that today, is that part of the follow-up is what are you going to do to prevent it, but then how do you also bring the family in to the solution? How do you engage them in doing all that? And again, we'll talk about that after lunch when we get into some of the issues around how do we do this. But now we need to have this conversation, right, Bruce?
Yes,
and
indeed.
It needs to be empathic. Do you know anything about empathy that you'd be willing to share with the group?
I can say a few words if you'd like me to.
Thank you, Bruce. I'd appreciate that.
Morning, everyone. I'm Bruce Lambert. With some of us, how many of you did I meet during that first session? It's nice to see you again. So, I think we were all moved by Carol's presentation, and it underscores the need to be able to connect emotionally with patients and families after there's been these unexpected events that harm patients. So Tim has already talked about the need to give people information. People want to know what happened. The traditional approach is to sort of stonewall families, to deny and defend, not tell them anything. So the candor remedy to that is to be truthful and honest, to tell them as much as we know when we know it, and to provide empathy and emotional support to them, acknowledging how they're feeling, allowing them an opportunity to elaborate on how they're feeling, apologizing if that's appropriate and warranted, and so on. And then continuing to stay with the families and meet their immediate needs, meet the immediate needs of the patient, obviously, meet the needs of the family, both on a short-term basis and then eventually on a long-term basis, involving compensation and financial resolution, which we'll talk about later on in the day. But the patients and families are not the only ones who are affected by these events. The people in that OR or the people that took care of Alyssa, these people are going to be deeply traumatized as well, or it's likely that they're going to be traumatized. The extent of the trauma depends on the severity of the event and the outcome and how it's handled. But they will need emotional support for their own coping with the trauma of what happened, and they'll need help in being taught how to talk with patients and families. So how many clinicians we have in the room? We have nurses and physicians all over the room. So in nursing school, in medical school, how many people had a course on how to talk with patients and families after these sorts of events? 0% of the people had this course. So in some way, you're sort of deeply unprepared to have these conversations. You've probably broken a lot of bad news in your careers or had to talk with patients and families about a lot of different things. So it's not as if you're completely unprepared, but no one has prepared you to have these specific kinds of conversations. But luckily, there's a learnable set of skills that you can master in relatively short order to be much better at these than you would be sort of by default. And then we have to recognize that the conversation with the patient and the family is an ongoing thing. So you guys have met Chrissy Milizzo, and now you've met Carol. It's now, for the Milizzos, more than a decade after the event, and we're still talking with them. For Carol, how long has it been, Carol, now? It's 10 years for Carol as well. So this isn't an event where we have a conversation, we sort of wash our hands, our work is done here. But especially in the more serious events, it goes on for a long time. So you have to view this as a process which involves this initial conversation, which is critical to have very soon. We talk about within an hour, you'd like to be talking to the family about what you know about what happened thus far. But that's just the first conversation. There'll be many, many more after that. There'll be an analysis of what happened. So one of the family's first questions is going to be, what happened? How could this happen? And what's the answer? Within an hour, what's the answer often to what happened? We really have no idea. Other than the barest essentials of sort of clinically, what's the status of your family member? Are they alive? Are they critical? Are they stable? What was the nature of the injury? But exactly why it happened and how it unfolded, we just don't know within an hour. So you have to be prepared to have this conversation about uncertainty, and then you're going to marshal all of your resources from your quality and safety team, your risk managers, your event analysis team. We don't call it root cause analysis as much anymore, but the people in your organization who are trained to do that kind of investigation have to be deployed, and then you have to be prepared to talk to the family about what you learn as soon as you learn it. And then there will be a series of follow-up conversations. Often a follow-up conversation a day later, maybe about how the patient is doing now, what we've learned so far, maybe a week later, and then maybe if there has to be an autopsy or if equipment has to be sent out to be analyzed, or if there's a much more elaborate investigation, maybe months later, when you finally have a kind of conclusive understanding of what happened. At all these stages, you're going to want to bring the family back and have a conversation with them where you're going to reveal everything you know and be as transparent as you can possibly be and try to answer all of their questions. Yes, Carol.
I just want to give color commentary sort of things that work and don't. One of the things that Bruce was saying is don't tell us anything that you don't know, because the minute you do, that's what we hear, and you don't get to unring that bell. And then we think you're lying. So the best thing to really do say is exactly what Bruce is saying. We don't have the information yet. As we get it, we'll share it with you. So it is such a key thing to not put anything out there, because we're in this mode that we're just hearing stuff, and it doesn't matter that it's wrong, that's what we hear, and you want to keep the trust with us.
And families might not be all that sympathetic to you or saying that you don't know. So you have to actually develop ways of saying that you don't know in a way that's empathic. So, one thing you might have to acknowledge their frustration. Say, I realize how badly you want us to be able to this question, and how unsatisfactory it is, and how frustrating it is for us not to know. But I don't want to tell you something today and be wrong about it and have to correct myself. So Tim has this formulation that he uses sometimes. So this is what we know, this is what we don't know, and this is what we're going to do to find out about what we don't know. And you could try to project a timeline, and you want to make that timeline realistic, but you can also express some uncertainty. So, we're going to do some things right away, and we're likely to have more to tell you in a few hours and tomorrow. Other things might take us longer to find out. If it involves equipment, if we have to do analysis of tissue, or if we have to go back to the records and so on, interview a lot of people. So I'll come back to this in one second. The central skill that we want to develop in these conversations, both with patients and families and with our colleagues, is empathy. So empathy is a complex set of skills, both emotional and cognitive, but they're learnable. It's not that some of us are born with empathy and some are not. Being empathic is a set of learnable skills. I think that if you've been at some of these previous workshops, you can see as we do these role plays, and we see people do some things well and some things not so well, and then the next group does a role play and it gets a little bit better. It's pretty easy to see incremental improvement, even in like a day or so of training. So empathy is not an unachievable skill that some people have and some people don't. It's a set of really concrete, learnable skills, but it's absolutely critical to provide them. And I think one of the dangers for health professionals is that you're very focused on giving information. So much of your life is about getting information from patients and giving information to patients. So this sort of model of information exchange that most of you are very good at, and it's the communication skill you rely on the most. In fact, I have this friend, and her dad is a doctor. He's a urologist, a wonderful guy. But he has a way of talking. He's a very scientific guy, surgeon, and he has a way of talking. His name is Dr. Schmidt. And one of the guys that married into this family says he dreaded when the doctor would lapse into Schmidt explanation mode. Which was this way of... yeah. It was like he had an ordinary way of talking when he was just a regular person, and then suddenly he would lapse into this more sort of robotic voice where he would start to lecture kind of and explain into his doctor voice where he would start to explain things. And that's a mode that I think all of us fall into easily. I'm a college professor, I do the same thing. But that's not what we want most of the time. This empathic mode where we're mostly listening, where we're trying to observe very carefully what people are feeling and reflect it back to them, where we're present to them, where we're not trying to control or do too much. Can I go forward again? Where am I pointing this? There we go. So this is a graph. We have a way of assessing your communication skills. Did we do the communication assessment? So how many of you took the communication assessment? So you remember we had you describe one person you know well and like, one person you know well and dislike, in as much detail as you can. And then it turns out there's this a measure with a long history that has a great deal of scientific validity. It's called cognitive complexity. It just refers to how rich and varied our representations are of the social world and other people. And it turns out that if we take these two impressions that you write down, one description of someone you know well and like, and a description of someone you know well and dislike, we can count up basically the number of adjectives you use. And this is, believe it or not, a pretty good measure of the quality of people's social perception. So here is a plot of about 450 people. We've now done 2 or 3 times this many across the country. We just haven't updated the plot in a long time. That shows the distribution of cognitive complexity scores. And what it shows is, I don't know if I have a laser pointer in here. I don't think I do. So what it shows is that there's a mean of about 20 of the average person. These were all health professionals like you. Or risk managers or attorneys or hospital administrators who took this assessment. And the average across about 450 people is about 20 unique descriptors. So when people describe someone they like and someone they dislike, and we add them all up, they used about 10 adjectives for each. But somewhere in the population, there are people who used 40, 50, 80, 120. So what this reveals is that among us, there are sort of savants at communication who have much greater social perception than most of us do. I think I took this, Tim, I think I scored at like 50 or 55. So what was that? So though I'm on the upper end of the distribution, and maybe that gives me some credibility to teach you this, I'm not like these freaks, these mutants who are up at 80, 90, 100. It's, the way I often imagine this is, when you watch a movie like RoboCop or something like that, and you see them assess a situation, and then they have like a readout comes in front of their eyes, right? So it's like, I imagine myself or an ordinary person, we walk into a social situation, we meet someone, and we get a readout, and it has like 10 or 20 lines of description on it. But some of these people, they walk into a situation and they're like, zzz, and they're seeing deeply, deeply, deeply into these situations. What does it empower them to do? It empowers them to be sort of much more effective as communicators because they're seeing much more depth, much more nuance, many more shades of gray. They're perceptive about people's motivations, their plans, their goals, their intentions, their feelings. And all of that rich perception they can deploy as they try to figure out what's the best thing to do, what's the best thing to say, what are the minefields I need to avoid, what are the problems I might be able to anticipate. So there's a couple of points to make about this. First of all, most of us are by definition average. But even the most average among us can learn these empathy skills. There's nothing magic about being able to recognize people's feelings and name them, or about being able to be quiet and listen, or about to ask open-ended questions, or to make eye contact, and so on. And the other thing is, regardless of your level of skill here, we need you all for candor. We find that in the huddle, which is a critical portion of the candor response, that the collective intelligence of the group is far more powerful than any one individual. Even if you have one of these mutant great communicators in your group, it's still the collective intelligence of the group. So imagine you have a huddle. There's often going to be a nurse, a pharmacist, a physician, maybe a nurse administrator, maybe a risk manager who are huddling about how are we going to respond? What are we going to say to the family? Who's going to go in and talk to the family? How are we going to investigate? There's so much, a hospital or health system, such a complicated place. And the knowledge that comes from nursing or pharmacy or medicine or surgery, anesthesia, there are these silos of knowledge, so everyone has something to contribute regardless of how well you might be able to communicate with the family. So the huddle is this critical place where everyone has to offer their insight, and then what you do is you find the best communicator in the group and you send them in to actually talk to the family, but they're empowered with the knowledge from everyone in the group. And that's why the huddle is so critical. So we want to show you a video by Brene Brown. If you've seen it before, I hope you'll enjoy it again. And this is Brene Brown. How many of you guys know Brene Brown? Writes a lot about vulnerability and empathy, or recommend her books and YouTube videos. But here she's talking about the distinction between empathy and sympathy. Before we get, do I need to do something to cue the, do they have to cue the, could you guys roll the video, please?
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had a, yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Yeah, there's so many important ideas there in that video, especially the idea that empathy is a vulnerable choice, that in order to be open to other people's emotional experience, we have to be in touch with something in ourselves which resonates with that same experience. So this is a definition of empathy from an author called Carla McLaren, who wrote a great book called The Art of Empathy. If this is something that interests you, I highly recommend the book. But there's a lot I like about this definition. She says it's a social and emotional skill. So first of all, it's not just all about emotions, it's about other aspects of social life as well. It helps us feel and understand the emotions. So it's cognitive as well. It isn't just about feeling in our gut, it's about thinking and understanding and perceiving and taking the perspective of another person. Their emotions, circumstances, intentions, thoughts, and needs, not just feelings, okay? So I think a simple kind of caricature of empathy is really, can I feel the feelings of another person? But empathy is much more about kind of being able to take their perspective cognitively as well as feel what they're feeling emotionally. And then that's the perceptive part. Then there's the active part of empathy, she says, such that we can offer sensitive, perceptive, and appropriate communication and support. So empathy is an active thing. It isn't enough simply to feel people's feelings or to know what they're thinking. We have to turn that perception into action. So we have to both feel and understand what people are going through, and then be able to offer effective compassion, consolation, support, etc. So we want to move now to our first simulation. Tim, would you like me to go through these ground rules, or would you like to do it?
No, you can.
Okay, very good. So I'll set it up. So
the one that's not on here is the voluntary piece.
Yeah, so I will mention that. So we're now going to do role play enactments of the various parts of the process of talking to the family and doing care for the caregiver, and then even later on this afternoon, talking about financial resolution. A couple of things we want to say up front. First of all, we found that in a group this large, there are some people who are sort of anxious about coming up to the front and doing one of these role plays. Anybody here feel any anxiety? Excellent. It's a perfectly non-anxious group, Tim. Occasionally there are people who are even anxious about raising their hand to say they're anxious. So what we're doing here is if you're the sort of person who's a little anxious about coming up here, and the anxiety is going to get in the way of your learning especially, you are exempted. We're not going to make anybody come up here who doesn't want to come up here. So if that's you, just quietly tell the people at your table that, you know, this isn't for me. I'm going to participate in the huddle, but I'm really not going to be ready to volunteer to go up to the front. Okay, so anyone can opt out. We do that because we found in the past that we would do these trainings and later people would tell us, I was so paralyzed by fear that you were going to pick me that I couldn't learn anything the whole day. And that's the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. So if you're anxious, you can opt out and we won't call you, but you'll still be able to learn. This is a pretty real environment. You think it's kind of role play and pretend, but once people get up here, especially once you're up here, it's going to feel pretty real. So we need to really respect and appreciate our colleagues for doing this. Be grateful for what they're doing. As we say, they're in the hot seat, but we're all sweating it out. Tim and I always have sweaty palms every time these things start, as we just want to make sure it goes well. Then after people are done, we're going to do this debriefing where Tim and I will come up, we'll ask the volunteer, how did they think it went? What was it like compared to what they said in the huddle? Then we'll ask the actors to reflect on what they experienced, and then we'll open up to the whole audience to see what people thought. And frankly, this is the most fun and interesting part of these trainings, and this is where most of the learning takes place. So we want to approach it with this open-minded, respectful attitude to the people who are brave enough to come up here, and this attitude of gratitude because they're taking a risk to come up and talk and do this in front of all their colleagues. So the way that structurally it's going to work is we're going to give you, Tim will come up and lay out more details of the case. You're going to huddle at your table for about 10 minutes. We want to use this list of questions, which I'm going to put on the screen in a moment. You're going to identify who's going to, well, we have actors playing the family member, correct, Tim?
But at the table, you want to identify those who play the role of the family member and the communicator, and then practice.
Gotcha.
So that you can say the actual words you're going to say, hear how it sounds, and get feedback at your table before you come up and do it with the actors.
Right, so one of the things we found over and over again is people go and they huddle up with their colleagues, and they think about sort of in general, what are they going to say? And then they get up to the front, and the first time it comes out of their mouth, it's not what they want to say at all. So what we recommend is you practice actually saying the words that you're going to try to say to the family, and have your colleagues listen, give you, oh, no, don't say that. Because there are certain things which you really don't want to say, but you could practice saying with your colleagues. So you want to set up a mini role play during the huddle, and then you'll be more prepared when you come up.
Bruce, what's one thing they should write down they never want to say to a family member? Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know how you feel.
And the corollary to that is, if you're tempted to say that, which you will be, the temptation is there, we've seen it happen enough times, is to practice saying, I don't know what you feel. I can't know what you feel. I can't imagine what it's like to be in this position. Those are good sort of stock phrases. The other corollary to that is think about what they are feeling. It's not that mysterious what people are going to feel. Okay, so brainstorm at your table a couple of the emotions and name these emotions at your table. What is it they're likely to be feeling? Anger, fear, anxiety, frustration, resentment. What is it that you think they're likely to fear? And be prepared to see those emotions and name them when you get up and do the role play. So these are the questions we want you to go over as you prepare for this first scenario. What are the goals of the interaction? What are you actually trying to achieve? The goals will be different at each stage of the process. Who or when should you respond? In this case, that's a question you have to answer in the real world. In this case, you're just going to respond right now as quickly as possible. This is going to be that initial response. Who should respond to the patient and family? Who are you going to send in there? How many people are you going to send in there? This is one of the most critical questions you have to answer in the huddle and in real life. What questions do you anticipate? Again, it's not normally a mystery. A smart group of experienced clinicians and administrators and risk managers will normally be able to anticipate the vast majority of questions that you're going to encounter. So you want to think about, can I handle those questions? Because you're going to anticipate some questions that you don't have the answer to yet. So you need to be prepared with that other answer about, we don't know, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, this is what we're going to do to find out, this is when we might be able to tell you, I know it's frustrating not to get the answer yet, and so on. What emotions do you anticipate? I already talked about that. How are you going to name and validate them? What are you going to say to the patient and family? Practice saying it now. What information can you share? What information can you not share yet? You may have suspicions. There may be hypotheses or theories floating around about what happened and why. But if you're not sure about them, it's probably not the time to share them. But you have to discuss what can you share now and what might you want to share later when you have greater certainty. What are you going to do about the caregivers? So we're not going to enact that now. That's going to be after the break. But you have to think about how you're going to take care of the people who are involved in the error or the bad event. And then you want to practice this at your tables. So let's begin now to set up the event.
Just to give you so you know the setup. Fire in the OR. Somebody's got to go in there right away. You saw the questions. Bruce, why don't you go back to the questions? People like to see that sometimes just sitting up there. So the name of the patient was Thomas Stevens. Okay? And you will be speaking to the son and the daughter of Thomas Stevens. The son's name is Jeffrey. The daughter's name is Susan. They have been concerned about their dad. Obviously, as you saw earlier on, he has some dementia. And they're concerned about him. They're concerned about him falling. They're concerned about the subdural. They are in the waiting room. outside the OR. And you can imagine what they're expecting, which is somebody to come back and say, hey, we're done. You know, this is where we are. They're obviously nervous about his heart because they know about his aortic stenosis and the fact that he's a little too fragile to undergo the general anesthesia. But you know there's now been this fire in the OR. The fire's been put out. He is stable. There's a plastic surgeon in there who's evaluating him. And now you need to go out into this waiting room. And there are walls all the way around this. So it is a private area where you can have this conversation in this kind of environment. Nobody else is around. And after you've had a chance to chat for a while, we'll bring the son and the daughter up who will be sitting on this couch. And you need to think about who do you want to have go in and do that. Any questions about the setup, the facts, the scenario? Yeah. Yes. Plastic surgeon is in the OR evaluating him and assessing him. He has not yet gone to the recovery room.
Have they done the burr hole yet?
No, they've not done the burr hole yet. They had to stop.
Are they still gonna?
Well, at some point, but not right now, because they need to stabilize him right now. They need to assess the degree of burn, all that other sort of stuff like that. So they haven't done that yet.
Did the fire alarms go off?
No. Fire alarms did not go off. The hotline went, no, I'm sorry, there. But any other, all great questions? Yeah.
What's his level of dementia?
So he's conversant, but he's extremely forgetful. His memory has really, really gone related to that. And right now, he's got some sedation on board. So he's really not aware of a lot of what's going on as he is right now. He is not able to sign his own consents, the other piece like that, feeling it he's not competent when it comes to the ability to really understand risks and the benefits and the alternatives of procedures. But he's conversant and he's kind of aware of his surroundings.
Where I'm going with this is, just in this case situation, your action may be, and what you choose to do may steer you in different directions off the information I'm asking is, what is the relative viability of actually doing this person if he's demented, has severe aortic stenosis, which they obviously haven't done surgery for? What was his quality of life?
Yeah, he got around. He actually had a pretty decent quality of life. Right. It's the memory issue. He gets a lot of joy out of the things that he does prior to falling.
Steer you on how you.
Yep. Yeah, he's not that far along, but you are asking really good questions about, well, ultimately, what will they do with his heart and the other piece related to it. Yep.
Getting the burr hole completed, things like that.
That's right.
Those are objectives that you have to map out.
And you need to do that right away or as reasonably quickly as possible because of the pressure. All right, so at your tables, you can now start going through the questions, just like Bruce said, practice it a little bit like that. And then in about 10 minutes, we'll get our volunteers to come up and have the first conversation with the family.
Ask for a volunteer or a couple of volunteers.
All
right, could I have the mic back up? Okay, at this point, we would like to ask for a table to volunteer to send up one or two or however many people you decided to have this conversation. Do I have a volunteer? I will say that it's difficult to be the first. We know that. But there's very little question in my mind that the people who actually participate in these enactments learn the most. So, and also get the greatest amount of gratitude from us and from their colleagues. So is there a volunteer? I heard several people who sounded really ready to do it. So I will ask for a volunteer and remain quiet until we get one.
I'm willing.
All right. Yes, are you?
Anybody else at my table is comfortable going up, so. I choose Sam.
You're calling for a colleague from another table?
I'm calling for a colleague.
Outstanding. Okay, let's give them a big round of applause for volunteering. Do you guys want 1 or 2 minutes, a minute to talk with one another since you haven't had a chance to huddle directly with one another so you get on the same page?
I hope you're okay with being a volunteer.
Yeah. So why don't you guys just talk with one another for 1 second and we'll reset the case very quickly. So we have the children, Jeffrey and Susan. The patient's name is Thomas. They're just they're in the waiting room. I guess we can assume this. We've moved them to a private area. They're still in the waiting.
There happen to be some private waiting rooms off the OR, and that's where they happen to be.
Okay, so there they are. So whenever you guys are ready, you can begin.
We certainly know you, but could you introduce to everybody in the group
Yes,
and
thank
maybe
you very
me and what your role is in real life, but what role you intend to play here?
My name is Dave Wancham. I'm an internist. I've been in practice for about 26 years. I do a little of everything. I do internal medicine. I do family practice. I do primarily ER, which I've done for about 20 years. And so I've been in these scenarios many times before, either in the ER or in the outpatient setting. So maybe that's for that reason I have a little bit more experience. But so this is the third. I've made 3 of these. This is my third time I've gone up on stage.
Awesome.
But it's been good. I mean, we've learned a lot from it. And you're right. The more you do this, the more you pick up on some nice tidbits.
Yeah. And could you tell us what you do in real life? Oh, who are you going to play in the scenario?
I'll play the physician who's part of the Candor team, who's the primary communicator.
Gotcha.
And then
but the people involved in the case are still in the OR stabilizing the patient.
Correct.
Perfect. Wonderful.
Okay.
Awesome.
And who will you play? Who are you in real life, and who will you play in this?
In real life, my name is Dar Elbert. I serve as the Assistant Administrator and Chief Nursing Officer at Kossuth Regional Health Center in Algona. And actually, as I'm recruiting Dave to my organization, I'm going to steal him away from Dallas County and Perry because he's an excellent communicator.
I see.
And so for the scenario today, I think I'll play the CNO.
Okay.
Awesome.
Hey,
well, let's give it up for these
One more
guys.
round of
Again,
applause.
being the volunteers, it's amazing.
Thanks so much. So whenever you guys are ready, just go on up and begin.
Okay.
And then that way.
Same thing. Yeah.
Same thing as before. Okay. All righty. So it's Thomas Stephen. All right. All right. Here we go. Susan, Jeffrey, Susan. Okay. Hello, hi. I'm Dr. David Wancham. I'm on medical staff here at Dallas County Hospital. And you're Susan and you're Jeffrey, correct?
Correct.
You're
Yeah.
Thomas
I'm
Stevens'
sorry, yes,
son and
Jeffrey.
daughter?
Yes,
Very nice
hi,
to meet
Jeffrey.
you.
I'm Dar. I'm the
Hi,
Chief
Dar.
Nursing Officer.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Susan. Yes.
I'm sure you're both very anxious, and we're going to give you as much information as we can as soon as possible. I always like to communicate with a little bit of some background information, and I'll jump into answering your most urgent questions as soon as I possibly can. I'm on the medical staff here at Dallas County Hospital, and I've been designated to be the primary communicator of any incidences that occur that are adverse, unexpected, so that I can get you the information that you need to know as soon as possible.
Did something happen?
Something did happen in the operating room.
Is he okay?
At this time, he's very stable. He's certainly alive, and we have a number of physicians taking care of him at this time. But I'm gonna tell you as much as I know so far. We don't have all the information about what happened, but we do have a significant amount that we communicate to you at this time, so that you have some sense of what's going on and what happened recently. As you know, your father had fallen. He has a couple of primary medical issues. He has a significant aortic stenosis. And as you know, that decreases blood flow to the brain, especially when there's some kind of exertion involved, and that can result in falls because there's not enough flow to the brain and that are at risk. He fell.
Yep.
He hit his head. That resulted in bleeding within the skull, between the brain and the skull.
We know.
Okay.
This part.
Okay.
What happened?
Okay. So he was taken into the operating room. The neurosurgeon was involved. He was being prepped appropriately to do a burr hole, which you're aware of as well.
Yeah.
The burr hole is just designed to remove the blood.
Which we were told is pretty common and relatively quick
It
procedure?
It is. It's very straightforward. It's a very common procedure. The complications are generally very, very few, are minimal, depending on the skill level, depending on where it's done, and depending on the surgeon.
Okay.
In this particular case, they had not created the burr hole yet, but when they create an incision in preparation for the burr hole to remove the skin, there's a fair amount of bleeding that takes place. The scalp is very vascular, and so when any kind of incision is made into the scalp, bleeding occurs, and it's very common to use something called electrocautery. It's basically a pen with current, and that electrical current will stop the bleeding so that the surgeon can proceed and continue to do what the surgeon needs to do. Well, in this particular case, as the electrocautery pen was applied to stop the bleeding, a fire started, and skin was burned. We're not exactly sure how this happened.
Sorry, so a fire started like he was on fire?
He was on fire from smoke. Smoke was generated.
Are you kidding me?
I'm not kidding, but I'm telling you as much as I know right now, okay?
He's alive?
He's alive.
Is he burned?
He has evidence of burning, at least 2nd degree, possibly 3rd degree, involving the scalp and the skin down to the neck.
God.
For that,
Sorry, so I just don't, it's just a lot of information.
it is.
But he's okay.
He's fine. He's
Okay.
stable at this time. No incision was made and no burr hole was created in the skull,
Okay.
just through the skin at this time. So
How does that, I'm sorry, I've never heard of.
I've never heard of that either, a fire.
Yeah, I've never heard of something like that happening. How does that?
well, we're not
does that
exactly
happen?
sure how it happened just yet. We're just gathering the information at this time, but the most important thing is to have people involved, first of all, to make sure he's comfortable and to make sure he's stable, make sure his blood pressure is okay, make sure his heart is beating as it should be. That's really the most important thing at this time. I know you're concerned about the smoke, and you're very frightened and you're very worried.
He's not even going to know what's going on.
Well,
How does he seem okay? I mean, I'm very concerned that he's in pain.
He's so frail right now.
Correct.
Is he?
Yeah, and I understand. I understand what you're saying, and I can't imagine what you're feeling right now. I know this is very distressing for you, and we're very sorry that this happened. But again, we don't have all the facts just yet. But as they come in, we will continue to communicate on a very regular basis with you. Okay?
He was on fire.
Well, technically, yes, he was. But there's not a fire at this time. The first thing that happened was there was smoke that was generated. You have certain elements that would create a fire. You have the heat from the pen, and if you have oxygen also being delivered, which was also taking place at that time, that created the two elements that would generate a fire. So we're trying to understand how it happened. But what's going on right now, he's very stable. His heart rate, his blood pressure are fine. He has more than adequate pain medication, so he's not in any distress in that sense. But we have a plastic surgeon in the room right now, taking a look at him, trying to get a sense of how much of an injury occurred to the skin and how much that surgeon might need to be involved.
And who's at fault? I mean, how does something like that happen?
Well, we're not entirely sure. We know the two elements of a fire involved, which is the oxygen delivery through the nose and the electrical spark or the current from the pen are the two elements. We need to find out what fuel, what was the actual fuel behind the fire.
Happened before?
Yeah. Is this something that happens? I've never even heard of such a thing.
Yeah, it depends. This is not a common event by any means.
I mean, I hope not.
No,
'Cause
in fact, we're
I'm concerned about his future care. Obviously, I'm worried about him being comfortable and
Can we
feeling
see
okay.
him?
Well, the most important thing right now is just to make sure everything is in place, that he's stable enough so that you can see him. But we have another priority, and the other priority is to evacuate that blood as well.
Yeah.
So we're in a very critical decision point right now. We have to make a decision of what to do next in terms of evacuating that blood, while at the same time making a decision about when to address the burns that he has. Is it a 3rd-degree burn that's going to require grafting? Or is it a 2nd-degree burn that will generally heal on its own with just supportive care?
God, that's going to kill him. It's going to kill him. I mean.
Yeah. You know,
we just want him to be. We just don't want him in any pain, you know.
No, he doesn't appear to be in any pain at this time. He really doesn't. And I think we've got a good group of people in there assessing him at this time, making sure that he's comfortable. But
oh my God.
I realize this is very, very distressing. I can imagine what you're feeling, but at the same time, we realize that he is stable and he's getting a good assessment at this time. We just don't have all the facts.
Why weren't we warned of this as a danger? I mean, if something like this can happen, why?
I'm not sure why that didn't happen. I wasn't involved in the point of the care where that was discussed, but it's not something that happens typically.
So now what?
Well, at this point,
do we stay here or what?
Yeah, I would remain here for the time being. We're going to continue to go in and out and to assess the situation, and as soon as we get additional information, we'll come out and we'll continue to communicate with you, okay? At the same time, if you have a question or a concern, please let Dar know so that she can come in and get me and so I can continue to communicate with you, because we don't want you feeling in the dark at any point in this whole care. We want you to be able to get the answers that you feel like you need in order to feel like things are moving forward like they should be.
Does he know what's going on? Can he tell? He barely knows where he's at from time to time.
As you know, as you maybe don't know, we had your dad sedated already for the procedure, and our physicians are keeping him under sedation right now so that he doesn't experience any pain. So right now, no, he's not aware at all.
So you'll just let us.
I'm going to leave you my cell phone number.
Okay, yeah.
And I'll write it down for you. And if you'd like me to help you enter it into your cell phone, I can help you do that right now as well. I will be back really fairly frequently. I'll be in and out of here. So you can expect to see a lot of me over the next hour. But I do need to leave in just a few minutes. I want to get a team working on determining what happened.
This is crazy. I can't believe I thought you were going to come in here and say that it was done.
I can tell how frustrating this must be for you. I'm very, very sorry that you're going through this right now. What other questions do you have right away?
Nothing right
I
now.
can't
It's a
think
lot of
right now.
information. I'm not really sure. I might just need to take a minute.
Right there. Let's give him a big round of applause. Well, could you guys stay seated? We'd like to talk to you about how it went. That was great. Thank you so much. So what we like to do now is find out what it was like for you guys, and then we'll ask the actors to respond, and then we'll open up to the audience, okay?
I guess I'm continuing to apply empathy here because obviously they're distressed, and I don't want them to feel like I'm insensitive to that. And the last time I did this, one thing that somebody made an interesting comment about is that you should allow time for pause, allow them to sort of integrate all the information so that they can maybe generate another question. Because when you're distressed, you really don't think clearly. You're just wondering.
Do you think that you paused a lot?
I did. I think adequately, but at the same time, they're when you pause, then they start to come out with more emotional reactions, and then at the same time, it doesn't become a real rational situation. So what you're trying to do is you're just trying to reassure them that we're on top of this. We're going to continue to communicate with you. I'll be in and out. As soon as I know something new, I'll be back. That way they feel like we're not leaving them in the dark.
So you said if you pause, a lot more emotions come out and it's not a rational situation. Are you wanting it to be a rational situation?
I think they need to vent. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's necessary. I think it's necessary to pause and let them say what they have to say and feel what they have to feel.
I see.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just you don't want it to go in the wrong direction where if you don't have the answer, you don't have the answer. And I kept kind of going back to
Is there a concern that their emotions might be out of control or something like that?
No, I really don't. I think it's appropriate. And I've seen the gamut of emotional reactions, and they can be pretty extreme sometimes. But theirs was very appropriate.
Yeah. Okay, so let's come back just a little bit. Could you guys talk about at your table? Can you tell us what the huddle was like and what you thought? What were some of your answers to the questions on the question checklist? So, what were the primary goals, et cetera? Why don't we start with you, Dar?
I think our goals were to get him as much information as we knew right now, which was basically A, we never got around to doing the procedure. B, your dad did suffer a burn in the emergency room. And C, we don't know why yet, but we're investigating that and taking care of your dad in the meantime. So dad's not having any pain. He is under sedation. And we're keeping him under sedation for right now. We've got a team of specialists in looking at him to determine what the next best steps will be.
And what went on at your table in terms of the huddle? What did you think the primary goals were?
I think I always get into the situation where I really want to start from the beginning, but I understand most patients' families don't want that. But I think it's important to create some background so they understand what's going on, because it gives context. And for example, we mentioned the fact that I came back to the fact that we hadn't actually created the burr hole yet, and he still has the bleed in his head. And that has to be taken care of. And so for that reason, we need to make two decisions about A, is this severe enough to require plastic surgery? B, when do we do the burr hole? So and it's just me. I really like to create context, and I think it's important.
That was interesting, because I think that was pretty distinct about your approach. I thought it took a while for you to get to what I thought was the main point.
Well, the other thing we talked about was...
That was an intentional decision, though.
Yeah, the other thing we talked about, the first thing we would jump into is A, he's still alive, and B, he's not in any distress or pain. But let's go back a little bit so we can talk about why. And maybe that's just my approach, and maybe it's not appropriate, but it's what I do.
Can you guys give me your sort of global sense for how did you think it went?
I think it went okay. It went okay. There's probably a little bit more. There's always some tweaking you can do as you learn from it. I think, you want them to the family to come from a high level of emotional distress down to a point where, okay, we'll wait to hear from you. Okay. And that's kind of where you want them at, where they're not going to be happy, obviously, but you want them at a point where they don't have any further questions, and they feel like you've done a good job in communicating.
That's interesting. Dar, how did you think it went?
So we weren't on the same huddle, obviously. And so, it was a very different approach. And when Dr. David started out with, you understand why your dad's here and what caused all of that. And I was thinking, come on, tell him. Tell him.
I was feeling a little bit of that also.
But I appreciated his approach, and I'm really curious, from you guys' standpoint, did you prefer hearing that background first?
Yeah, so let's go to the actors.
Hear?
So Matt, why don't you go first?
You did a great job of explaining.
I actually remember we interacted, have trained before, all of us. Here we are again. Yeah, new situation, new people. I've got some more to say. I actually did notice, I remember that we ran into this a little bit last time, and there was a little bit of, you were reviewing things that we didn't need to review, in my opinion. Like, we knew that he fell. But there was an appreciation of the way that you just talked about it, of starting from, I need you to know certain things. I recently started a book, and I was reading the introduction, and I was like, I know this. And then I got to the preface, and I was like, this is something that I need. So I would just have sifted it down a little bit more into the essential, because when you started using some of the medical jargon, I stopped listening, and I was like, what are we getting to? What is it? And it made my anxiety go up. But that's not to say that any review wouldn't have been helpful, because the balance that you brought was, once we got into it, I didn't feel like there was any excess fat on our conversation. Like, you got direct, and then Dar, you only spoke really when you needed to. So it was really just that beginning that sort of felt a little bit unnecessary. Yeah, it just, again, like, we're sitting here, we know now something's gone wrong, and I just want to know what it is.
And that's just me and my style.
Yeah,
but that's just what I do.
And it's maybe just reading per situation, obviously per case, per people, but I felt like our body language was starting to let you know, like, okay, what's happening here?
There was one other factor. What's your first name? David. When David came in and started, first you said sort of, I'm from the team that comes when bad things happen. Right. And then there was this long explanation about Dad's fall and his aortic stenosis. And I thought that, especially because you sort of dropped this little bomb in the beginning about, I'm the bad news team, and then where's the bad news? And it's just waiting for the bad news. So I think maybe your approach, which I understand, I think
I made the assumption they knew something was wrong, though. Is that the
that's
right
interesting.
Okay,
I'm not certain that that's
anything. Like,
yeah, they didn't see the smoke coming out of the OR. There was no code called. There was no alarm.
Well, that's my miscall.
Yeah, so they're just, and sometimes when we set these cases up, we're not totally on the same page as to the facts. Okay. So they were just kind of sitting in the waiting room,
thinking everything was okay.
Exactly, and waiting. So that's why they anticipated you coming in and saying, "Dad's all done. He's headed to the recovery room," something like that. So Marika, what were your perceptions of how it went?
I was just gonna say though, but the meat of, again, like, I just want to drive home. The meat of the conversation was really well taken care of, and I felt in good hands. That first part is just being able to to pick that apart is very helpful, I think, but I just wanted to let you know that when we were talking about it, you were right there and I was right there with you.
Okay. Marika.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, like you're just a very nice team. You do have an incredibly, you have a very trustworthy sort of way of communicating, which is really nice. You know, it feels like you 100%. You know what you're doing. But yeah, I would echo all of Matt's sentiments. I do think it changes that in our minds, the scenario was set up that we had no idea. We were just waiting, thinking like, oh, wait, what's going on? That makes me understand your approach a little bit more. But I agree, I think just a little less explain. You know, obviously either we took him or the ambulance came. We knew he fell. We know our father's sick. We know the procedure. That's why we're waiting here for him. So just a couple little things like that I think could have been trimmed. But absolutely, I think, and just be aware that sometimes when you're throwing all that information up front, not only is it not always totally helpful, but a little bit of a waste of your time because our minds are just spinning into and latching onto phrases. He's alive. Is he in pain? So sometimes all that information up front doesn't really help us anyway. I mean, and again, that's probably tailored to the individual. Some people might be asking lots of questions. Some people might just be sort of shell-shocked. And just one minor thing I noticed, your delivery of, well, he's alive, came off a little, well, I mean, yeah, things have gone wrong, but hey, I mean, he's still alive. Like, well, what? I don't know, but there was something in your intonation that was like, yeah, but what's the quality? Is he in pain? Is he okay? And I think it could be as simple as, okay, he's absolutely, yes, of course, he's alive. We're helping him. He doesn't seem to be in any pain. It somehow sounded a little bit like, well, at least he's not dead. I don't know why. It just came off that way. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But really lovely
Tim,
overall. Really lovely.
Marika, what I hear you saying, it's a bit like the Brene Brown video. What you don't want to hear is the at least, and in this case, you felt it. You didn't hear it, but you felt it. Well, at least he's alive.
Yes.
See, so you got to be careful, that it doesn't come across as at least, he's alive.
Yeah, I think
it's more like you may be very worried about him, and I want to reassure you right now he's alive and he's stable. And then you can potentially move into that. That's just a suggestion. Bruce,
I was going to say exactly the same thing, so you took the words out of my mouth. So let's open up to the audience and get some observations from you. What did you guys observe? How did it relate to what you were going to do? Yeah, Michelle.
Whoa, where's the chat box?
We'd like you to,
it's on video, so we'd like you to take the microphone.
It's so interesting because at our table, when we were huddling, we struggled with the very thing that we observed here. Knowing from last session how important those very first words are. And we couldn't agree at our table what those first words should be. Do you start out with, we're here to talk about something that just happened in the care of your father?
Yeah.
He was injured in a fire. I mean, what are those first words? Because those first words are so important. Do you use, there was an event? Do you use, there was a fire, he was injured, he's okay, but. I mean, my gosh.
Yeah, there was some, we were talking, what's your name? Tara. So Tara.